I'm pretty angry about what's happening. I'm angry because it could have been avoided if we had more talented diplomats at the table. Our intelligence community has been all over this. Bravo for them. They have told us exactly what Putin's aspirations were, what he was willing to do to try and accomplish them. And yet, for whatever reason, our State Department and our administration has completely failed us behind the scenes. And now their answer is sanctions. Sanctions that, by the way, don't go far enough. And heck, they don't even sanction Putin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. It is good to have you here. We've been watching a market, meanwhile, that's in sort of chaos and turmoil. We managed to recover some. But I'll tell you, like, who the heck knows right now? Because it's unclear just where this is going. I will say, I've been proven right. I've been telling you about gold for a long time. I've been saying you want something to help even out your portfolio in disastrous times like this. And indeed, people are flocking to gold. If you're interested in gold, do go to LegacyPMinvestments.com. Portions of today's program are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals. But I'd be telling you this anyway. I've been telling you this long before we had any gold people on the show or sponsorship, because you want to be able to protect your assets in times like this. But let's get back to these sanctions that are really no sanctions. I mean, I'm sorry, sanctions can work, but you've got to actually enforce them. And no one's ever willing to enforce them. I mean, think about the years and years, the decades that we've had sanctions on North Korea. And the guys, building all kinds of nuclear weapons to take us out. So, driving around in fancy cars and living the high life while his people starve. So sanctions often have the unintended effect of hurting the people while just, enabling these horrendous leaders to continue their dictatorships. But the reason for that is, and I would argue, because I don't want any lives being lost. I'm a big believer in you lose dollars before you lose any lives. So before we commit military members, you ought to be thinking hard about how you can enforce those sanctions. And guess what that means? That means actually holding China accountable, the rest of the world accountable. For goodness sakes, this takes the cake. Do you know that we're still allegedly going forward with these nuclear talks with Iran? Oh, and they're very hopeful about these nuclear talks with Iran, but it turns out that the other ambassadors at the table there in Vienna next week are going to be the Russians. So we're relying on the Russians to help negotiate a deal with Iran. I mean, you cannot make it up. Okay, people? At some point, you just got to take a stand. And it's time to take a stand right now. And again, in the interest of avoiding any kind of military conflict, this is why we want those sanctions enforced. And so the answer is, guess what? We're not doing business. We're the world's biggest economy. That carries some weight. We're the biggest economy in the world, and you're not doing any business with us if you're doing business with them, meaning the Russians, meaning Vladimir Putin. So pick your sides. But if we find out that that little country over there in Timbuktu is doing business with China, which is doing business with Russia, then you're out of here, right? No business with us. And simultaneously, we have to be willing to do that in terms of our business with China. So we need to be able to say to the big guys there, who represent now increasingly a very large economy that, if we're not careful, could overtake ours in the future. We have to say, okay, we're not going to continue our business relationship if you are going to continue yours with Russia. Okay, it's time for the world collectively to stand up together. And my feeling very strongly is sanctions. I know a lot of people say, sanctions can't work. They can't work because nobody actually implements them. Nobody actually follows through with them. But this is the time to do it. I don't have a ton of confidence in this team, though. Interestingly enough, Senator McCain, before he passed away, and while he was still in office, gave a pretty powerful speech when Obama chose Antony Blinken to be an Undersecretary of State. And in this speech, he stood up before everyone in the House there, and he said, in the Senate, actually I think it was everyone on Capitol Hill, both the House and Senate, in this speech, he said, look, I can't condone this. I have to say something because I really worry that Antony Blinken will wind up costing American lives. He had no confidence in the guy. That guy is now our Secretary of State. You couple that together with Joe Biden, who, for whatever reason, just always seems to get everything wrong. I mean, like, he's been there 40 years in Washington, and he's been on the wrong side of every major foreign policy decision. And we know what we just went through with Afghanistan. I mean, if I'm Putin, I'm like, this is my shot, right? He's been there, 22 years trying to run things. He's never gotten over the fall of the Soviet Union. Never gotten over it. You know, he worked in Intel. He was a KGB officer. He's actually, I believe, stationed in Germany during the fall of the Soviet Union, and has always yearned for it. And you know, understandably, a lot of people in Russia, they kind of yearn for this Russian greatness, this ideal that he had in his head, and he wanted to bring Russia back to that. You'd think if he were smart, you know, from a business perspective, economically, he would just focus on the economy there because, you know, Russia had a lot to offer, but he's completely screwed it up. So the economy's a mess. And what does he do? He turns to, oh, let me go take territory. It's actually an arcane, old-fashioned kind of approach, right? Because what are you going to do with more territory? It's just, you know, unless it's a massively contributing member to your tax revenue, you just got more problems on your hands. And in this particular case, you got the entire world now angry with you. And this whole, well, you know, he's just going to go for little parts of it. Listen, I'm just going to say this. Our intel community has been spot on this one. They got it right. What our administration does with the intel, you know, I don't have a lot of faith in, but I have faith in the people on the ground that are reporting this. We've also gotten word that a lot of the Russians are kind of leaky, so they spill a lot of things. So we've gotten a lot of things that have come to our attention there. We understand the situation, and according to many members of our intelligence community, it's very clear that this is not just Ukraine that he wants, but much more. So his aspirations are significant. And I don't know if this team is entirely cut out for fighting back against that. I mean, heck, they haven't even sanctioned Vladimir Putin. They sanctioned his buddies, but they're like, oh, okay, we're gonna hold out that. We're gonna sanction all his friends. We're not gonna sanction him. Guys, you gotta sanction everyone, okay? You gotta sanction the hell out of everyone, and you make sure that you're not sitting down with the Russians in Vienna next week to talk about Iran. You make sure that you cut Russia off from the international stage. I mean, I'm looking at this UN Security Council. I don't know, have they released a statement? They were hemming and hawing this morning about what they were going to say, blah, blah, blah. The head of the Security Council there is Russia. I mean, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm laughing about it, but I'm just so angry about it. I even waited to tape with you today because I wanted to have more time to digest and think about this because if you've been following my tweets or if you follow me on Locals, I encourage you to do that, by the way, trishregan.locals.com. You'll know how mad I am. You'll know how frustrated I am because it feels like this could have been prevented. And I just have no faith in the powers that be. I mean, for goodness sakes, John Kerry out there today telling the BBC he's worried about climate change. Everybody's going to lose focus and be all focused on Ukraine and Russia and not focus on climate change. Enough already, okay? The billionaire who's got to take his private jet to go pick up his award because his time is so precious. You know, forget about the rest of us. He can pollute the environment. He can. You can't. I can't. These people are just like from another realm. I encourage you, join my chat. Happening live at 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. That would be Friday on Locals. You can sign up for free, trishregan.locals.com. You can correspond directly with me. You can help support the show right there on Locals. I'd love to have you. It's algorithm free. In other words, they're not cutting you off, cutting me off. And so it's a much more organic, pure kind of experience. I'd just love to have you there. So please join me. But I'm looking at this mess in our markets and yeah, we managed to make back a little bit of ground. How long will that last? I spoke with one market watcher the other day who believes that maybe we are bottoming out here. Of course, observe, great timing, guys, that is about to raise rates as oil is at $100 a barrel, as our markets are reeling from this crisis. They're going to raise rates. So that's happening allegedly next month. I don't know, maybe this will give them an excuse not to. They're certainly always looking for an excuse not to raise rates. But any way you slice it, I come back to having a well-diversified portfolio. And part of that diversification for every investor should include investments like gold. Precious metals in general, I happen to be a big believer in gold because, look, it stood the test of time, for goodness sakes, thousands of years. It's the one thing that you can kind of count on in your portfolio long run to have some stability. And what did you see over the last couple of days? But a lot of people flocking back into gold because they're looking for that stability. They're nervous, understandably so. So take a look at gold right now. And when you do, I want you to call my friends at Legacy Precious Metals, legacypminvestments.com. You can go to 1-866-589-0560, 1-866-589-0560. Wonderful family-run business, been in business 4 decades. Charles runs the place. You can tell him that I sent you, and they'll take very, very good care of you. But, whether it's a gold-backed IRA or putting the gold in your basement, or some other kind of way to get this into your portfolio, I think it's actually pretty important right now. So I wanted to mention that. But I want to get back to this idea of what's going on in Washington right now, because I feel like we can't trust this team to be doing the right thing. And I hate to say that because, look, at a time like this, it's like all hands on deck. You just want to be absolutely supportive of your country. And I am. I mean, you should know that I'm an American first, and I'm a long-term believer in our economy and in the great capitalist nation that we are. I mean, we'll get through this, but we're going to have some pain along the way. The risk, of course, is that we've gotten a little too, what's the expression? Fat, happy, lazy. We're like debating, the role of transgenders in the U.S. military instead of thinking about what's going to happen when Putin tries to take Ukraine. It's almost because it's like unthinkable to us. We haven't had to deal with this in generations. I mean, you've got to go back to World War II to have anything remotely like this. And so I think that's part of the problem. We've been so fortunate that we can sit there and say, oh, well, we don't like traditional energy. I mean, this administration is all about green energy. I got nothing against green energy. You know what? Go for it. I'm all for all the energy sources you can find, but don't cut off the whole other shebang, right? Don't cut off oil when 98% of all cars on the road are still gas guzzling. That just doesn't make any sense in light of wanting to have an independent, politically independent nation. I don't want to rely on Russia. I don't want to rely on the Middle East. I want us to be able to produce our own energy. So I'll take it. Whether you're drilling or whether it's solar panels on the house, bring it on. But this administration, it's like all or nothing, right? Like you can't have any oil. You got to get rid of all the oil. Can't drill. Can't have Keystone Pipeline. Nord Stream's fine. Over there in Europe, we'll make the Germans dependent on the Russians. Like that makes any sense. By the way, Germany, just on Monday, finally said, okay, we're suspending this. Guys, so much of this mess is our own doing. And it's because the West has become able to overthink things. It's like we have just too much time on our hands and we've forgotten what it means to really get out there and try and succeed and make a life for yourself. So we've got a lot of problems here. We're not doing enough. Maybe they're trying to keep some of their powder dry. They think, well, if we don't sanction him, maybe this will prevent him from going into other places. The problem is, and we learned this in World War II, you gotta choke him off, right, while you can. And if you continue to allow him to gain more and more territory, where does it end? I mean, does he wind up in Poland and Lithuania, where I have relatives? Does he wind up, back in East Germany? I hope that this doesn't go in the direction that some members of our intel community believe it will. But I think it's worth being concerned right now. And then I would also double down on saying, look, we don't want to be part of this. And the answer to not be part of this is to actually have better diplomacy so that it doesn't get to this stage. And that is why I'm so frustrated and so disgusted with this team right now. There is no reason for any of this. There is no reason for any life to be lost. Please join me tomorrow. Please join me on my Locals program. I'd love to have you there. We're going to talk about what Putin really wants. And it's been well documented for years and years. I can remember actually back at G8, actually, because Russia was part of it, in Heiligendamm, Germany, back in 2007. And he was dominating the talks then. People were saying, look, like, he really wants more territory. And these are his aspirations. And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand what's going on inside his head, we're not really going to understand the situation at all. By the way, I should point out, this is very good news. Half of Russia doesn't want anything to do with this. Why? Because they have relatives, right, in Ukraine. These are their people. They don't want to be bombing their people. So I think that number will start to shift, and you'll see more and more Russians, as news of this violence gets out, saying we don't want to have any part of this because this is not who we are either. So again, please join me on Locals. We're going to talk about what else could possibly go wrong, right? I mean, like, what else? What, I mean, our borders a mess. 2.1 million people expected coming illegally to the U.S. Inflation is off the charts. Inflation, which I've been warning about all along. We have this mess now, like a World War III on our doorstep. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. So we're going to talk about it Friday, tomorrow, live at 4 p.m. Eastern on my Locals channel. It's so good to have you all here. Thank you so much for downloading this podcast. Do make sure that you are subscribed on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm going to be right back here, actually over on Locals. So go over to Locals. Join me right there, trishregan.locals.com. I'll see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. Thanks so much.